Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have back with us Nef El Bey with C&K Healthcare Advisors and the founder of Insured by Nef. We'll be talking about legacy protection. Nef, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Hey, I think that a lot of times people don't really get the full picture of building a legacy. Right. I mean, they're like, yeah, I want to live my life good. I want to accumulate enough money to be able to retire and do the things I want to do. But a legacy, that elevates things to the next level. So when you're working with working class families, what do you advise them regarding legacy planning? When do you tell them to start it? Because you can't start legacy planning the day before you retire.
Correct.
I mean, you could, but it's not gonna look too good.
No, not at all. Well, what I advise them to do as far as planning for their legacy is like now, for me, it's really a sense of urgency, Mm-hmm. And so when they think about legacy, they're like, well, what does that look like? And what I tell them is, listen, if you want to have a retirement or, something that you can leave your children, you cannot save it away. And a lot of people say, what? No, me putting in my savings account is not going to give me the funds that I need. You need to do that through insurance. Insurance isn't only for the rich. It's how so many people do get rich, And so we have products that you can put the money in that will give you an internal rate of return on that money, build up that cash value. It'll also build up compound interest, right? And these are products that are used that we promote through my business. And so with that being said, think about this. If you're putting your money in a savings account, which a lot of people do, right? Well, the bank really doesn't use that a lot because you're using it more than the bank. The bank provides you with interest when they can use your money, like, CDs or, mutual funds, right? But think about this. The average American think that when they're going to retire, they're just going to clearly rely on their savings. Like I said before, you can't save your way into this. You're going to have to put it in a vehicle where that money is going to be like catapulted or put it on steroids a little bit to kind of help it along. So that's what I tell individuals. Listen, let's talk about this immediately. Let's get you into a plan where your money will start working for you.
100%. We could probably go into the weeds about compound interest, right? And go, if you've heard the example about, would you rather have $2 million now or one penny doubled for 30 days? And it's like, oh my word, a penny doubling. No. But the penny doubling is like a gazillion dollars. And it's like, wow, you never think about that compound interest. So yeah, that little 0.00 whatever percent that the bank might peel off and give you a little bit of crumb, that is not going to build your wealth. You need to have something where your money's working for you, but in a protected way, because if you start seeing things out there and online, like, oh, we can give you a rate of return of X, it might not be protected. You might lose that money. And you talk about losing ground and then trying to retire. So talk a little bit about making some of those safe, protected decisions.
Absolutely. So, thinking about retirement, it can be a little overwhelming, right? And so I think that's why some people avoid the conversation. But, start small, right? But start intentionally, right? So, I tell individuals that it doesn't take a whole lot to do a whole lot. But at the same time, be intentional about that, So if you have not put anything towards your retirement, and you're in your 40s or 50s, then, saving $25 a month, that's really not going to do a whole lot. So be intentional. What I mean by that is like $300 or $500. You'll be amazed at what that money, would do. And then the earlier you begin, the more powerful the compounding, begins. But you have to be intentional about what you're doing. And that's just, with anything, but especially when it comes to this money game and when it comes to this. And so there are things out there that can help, with that, but you have to shift that mindset to say, hey, okay, this is what we're doing. And it has to be a sense of urgency that we have to do this now and not wait, like you were saying before, the day before you want to retire. We need time. These products need time to work. Yes.
It really does. And here's the deal. It's kind of like you can't plant a seed and yell at the ground and go grow, 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 and come check it every hour.
You
You know,
can't
you've
eat
got
the
to
fruit the
have
first day.
right. You got to have the faith that okay, I did it. I'm watering it. I'm doing the things, and I'm trusting the process. So I think that's a really big, and it really kind of gets down to that mindset shift, right? So it's
Right.
like it's you can't wait till it's too late.
Mm-mm.
So, how do you take small practical steps now that build on each other regarding this concept of building a legacy and protecting a legacy?
So, like a small step would basically be like, instead of me getting my Starbucks every day, for $9 a day, right? Let me put that towards a policy. Let me put that into an IUL and build that money up, right? But, like I said, being more intentional. So, start now. One plan that I worked on a family with, their average salary that they made was like 80K, a year. And he was saying, I can't do a whole lot. I can only do like 250 a month. That's fine. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So after I was able to illustrate out what $250 would look like, in the products that we use. And he's a 35-year-old male, right? When he saw how we were able to illustrate it in like 20 years, he would have like close to $150,000. He was ecstatic. He couldn't believe it, right? Where's that coming from? And I'm like, well, it's not a secret. Like I said, when you put your monies in the right vehicle, the money is able to work and grow. And, he just felt relieved because he knew that putting that money into a savings account, it was not going to give him the return that he wanted. But by using these products that we had, he was able to leave a legacy for his children. Think about, when you were starting off, and how much more your life would have been if your father or mom would have handed you a check for $150,000 and said, Mike, go out and, pursue your dreams, right? A lot of us don't have that experience. We have to work hard and get where we are. And there's nothing wrong with that. But just think about how much richer our life would have been as far as things that we could have accomplished and the opportunities that we might have missed out on, getting to where we want to get now if we would have had the resources that we need. And that's what I encourage. Listen, you might not have had that for yourself, but do it for your children, right? Because this is your legacy. This is your name, right? And so you want to be proud about that. Let your children be in a better position than you were. And that's why I encourage a lot of our families to do. Leave that legacy behind. Leave it behind.
And I think that is something where when you can start painting that picture of what the legacy could look like, it gives you that seed. We talked about planting a seed, right? It gives you a seed in your belly to go, okay, that feels good. Now I want to check on that every year. I want to add to that. I want to, and you as a person, a parent are looking at that going, that's not just for me to get the boat. That's for me to, have my family name, my family legacy, take care of my kids, grandkids, all of that. So that comes down to another important thing that I know you focus on, which is education. If you were to stop 10 people down the road from you and say, tell me about legacy, they would go, like, what? So talk to me about how you use education to help them understand that this is something that should be done, not just for the ultra elite wealthy, but everyone.
Right. Absolutely. And that's what it is. So even talking to individuals, you can't base it off of what they look like, or, oh, they already know. A lot of times they don't know, 77 million people don't have life insurance. And when you think about that, you're like, oh my God, that's a lot, but it's scary, right? And so what that's going to mean is that when that individual pass away, they're going to leave a mortgage. They're going to leave somebody in a predicament, in a pickle to think about how they're going to bury their loved one or go on living their life, right? Just having their day-to-day, operations taken care of. But when we educate and say, hey, you can do this now. When I talked about before, and one of the products that I love to talk about all the time, which is the IUL, how it does so many things, giving you that life protection, that family protection, that death benefit, right? And then also building up that cash value. And that cash value that is building up, you can use that. And then when you do pass away and you have that death benefit, you have left that amount of money to your family and to your loved ones. Now they can go on living and create and live their lives as you were still here. That's what you want. And so when you start painting that picture about like the lack of resources, that's what's going to happen. Because I think a lot of times we don't like to talk about when death. We don't like to talk about that. Don't talk about that, but it happens. Death is really a part of life, right? So when you start speaking about, hey, if this loved one was not here to provide you for this, what are you going to do? And then they sit there and I let them think about that, or if I ask the individual, what are your goals and dreams in life? And they say, oh, I want to, travel. I want to do this. And I ask them, I say, the job that you're on right now, do you think that's going to do that for you? And they sit there and think about that. And a lot of times they say no, right? So then I say, well, what's going to happen to all of what you want to do? What's going to happen to all these dreams that you told me that you want to accomplish? And, and they're like, I guess it never happens. And, so they, feel downtrodden. But I say, well, what if I can tell you that you can accomplish all of that, by educating yourself and, making these small investments and being intentional about it, would that interest you? And they're like, yeah, tell me more about that. And then that's how we start having the conversations. But it's really like, shifting their mindset to really think. Because a lot of times, we go about our day to day, but a lot of times we're like in a bubble about what we think is going to happen. And reality really is not our reality. We're somewhere else. But we can really paint that picture and let them educate them on, hey, this is what your legacy is going to look like. If you don't make steps towards this and you paint that nice ugly picture for them, now they're starting to realize, okay, I need to do something about this. I need to do something.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good point. And when we think about protecting legacy, you need to have a legacy to protect. And one of the ways that you protect legacy from the financial standpoint is making sure that the money that you are accumulating in the right way, safely, is not going to get holes punched in it. Kind of like the proverbial bucket, and you pour money in, that's your retirement savings. And then here comes this whole boom from expenses, from taxes, from inflation, from, big things you had not planned on. And now the money's flowing out. How do you help your clients, plan for the probability that could happen and then addressing those kind of things?
Okay. So again, like I said, we do have a conversation about it, and really helping them plan is I start asking questions, right? So I ask them like, if you don't have a life insurance outside of your job, what are you going to do? And unfortunately with the state of the economy, I have had to deal with individuals that lost their jobs, right? So they're walking around uncovered. Right. So then I say, well, okay, you can get covered. And so we talk about that and what that looks like. And then after we talk about that, then we say, well, look, this is what this plan really can do for you. And so we can explain that, hey, you can give the living benefits, and they're not clear about that. And I'm like, if something happened to you, and really get, naked and honest, like say if you got cancer, I hate to talk about that, but that kind of happens, a lot. People are not expecting that. And they're like, oh yeah, that did happen to, my friend or my mom or my cousin, and they start thinking about that. And so you start, getting them into their emotion to really think about this, because this is really serious, So when we start talking about that, and they now can relate to, hey, if this happened to me, where am I going to be? Right. How would I put my family, or how would I take care of my family? What kind of situation and predicament am I leaving them in? Now they're ready, right? Now they have bought into it, and they're like, what do I need to do? So when we talk about the products that we have, we say, listen, you can put your money in here and it's safe. And I really do love the IUL, because we do use market gains and not market losses. With the state of the economy and how everything is going, the stock market goes up and down all the time, right? And so when you say that, hey, when your money is put in there and your principal is always protected, they're like, oh, wow. One of the first questions they ask is, what is the risk in this? And I said, the risk is you not having it. That's the risk.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, really? I'm like, nothing is going to happen to your money. Like if the market crashes and nothing, and you don't gain anything, your principal is protected. So what's in there? Nothing's going to happen. And, once we give them that assurity, they're like, okay, great. But I said, but if you don't do anything, this is what will happen,
Wow.
So.
That brings up an interesting point is opportunity cost. If you don't do something, that's an opportunity cost because you could have done it and now what have you lost? But that is something really an interesting thing in a really neat position you're in to go, what's the risk? You're not going to lose money. What other kind of product, can you go to your stockbroker and go, oh, I want to invest in whatever mutual fund, whatever. Am I going to lose money? Well, the market always can go up and down, but in what you're doing, you can say you will never lose money. That's massively huge. Secondly, I think it's really also powerful to be able to say to someone, this is not some brand new thing that it might be new to you that you've not have heard of this strategy. But isn't it true that this type of product has been around for literally hundreds of years and banks even put our money that we put in savings into these types of permanent life insurance policies?
Absolutely. Right. And so when you say that, because, that's the first thing. Oh, I've never heard of this before, and I say, well, just because you haven't heard it doesn't mean it's not true. It is true, so I do my due diligence. I will send them a YouTube video and, documentation, but really educate them on that. But I say, listen, the bank use insurance, the FDIC. That I stands for insurance. They're like, oh, yeah, everybody use that. They take your money you put in the bank and loan it out to you and put your money in a policy, making money off of it. Insurance is the way to go. But a lot of times, really, it is what we have been told, what our mind says is about insurance. And it's never been explained like, hey, that it could we could use it to work for us. And, not the other way around. So it's just really like a mind shift.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And I think that's something that too many times people are like, okay, well, it sounds too good to be true, or it's going to have some risk in it. But when you can see that, big banks are doing it, and Walt Disney even used his whole life policy, permanent policy to fund Disney back in the day, it really is something like, okay, well, you've got to trust and have that mindset shift. And let's talk a little bit too about just some specific ways that this can help protect that legacy, because a product like this can help plug up some of those holes in the bucket we've been talking about, because if certain expenses pop up, this becomes a tool, a location you can go down to access. So, like for instance, if you get put into a long-term care facility, that's expensive. So how can that help to prevent some of those outpourings of expense?
So like you mentioned before, with our IUL, which stands for the Index Universal, Life Plan, some of our products do have what they call a LTC, long-term care product, right? And what that basically means is that if something happens to you and you cannot perform two of your daily living activities, right? And it's a whole list of them. But say if you can't get dressed anymore, you can't feed yourself, you have to have a written note from your doctor. So he'll say, Mike can no longer do this or do that. When that happens, then you can access 80% of your policy, and that can go towards you going to a living facility, like a nursing facility, right? Now, those are really expensive. And I tell individuals, if you don't plan for that, what's going to happen is either you'll be taking care of your family member, or you have to go and go to like social services, and they have programs that you may qualify for, but it is based on income. And a lot of times you don't qualify. So if you don't qualify, that means that you have to pay out of pocket, or you have to not take advantage of that services and be at home at the strength of a family member that can take care of you. But if you have planned, right, we're talking about planning. If you have planned and went on and applied for this IUL, got this policy in place, it does come with the long-term care rider. And, what I want people to know is the goal isn't, just to buy insurance, but it's to own your financial future. And, you are spending on protection, but you're not just spending on protection, but you're investing in a peace of mind. That's what it really is, to have a peace of mind, right? I think the reason why people don't talk about this is it can become convoluted, or it feels like that it might be too expensive, or it's just too much that, they might not want to even make themselves come to talk about. But the unfortunate thing is I have had to work with clients that did not plan. And it was very unfortunate because they did not have things like this in place. And the only thing I could do was just listen. And you know what they tell me? Nef, I should have done this like a year ago. What can I do now? What can I do now? And nothing. Like,
it's kind of like having a car accident and you don't have car insurance, and you call up the insurance company going, please insure me. Well, it's too late. And it sounds funny, but sometimes people just really don't think that way. So I think that that's really super powerful. It gives you peace of mind, but it also it empowers you to know that this type of thing is in place to give you options now that can protect and save, huge expenses. And also it's a planning tool for that legacy protection that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. And when you begin to treat insurance as your family's first financial foundation, you stop surviving. You stop and you start building a legacy. And that's what we're here for. We're here to really build a legacy.
Yeah. Love it. It's awesome. Awesome. I think that's the thing that I think we'll wrap up with, is that mindset shift. You got to plan for that legacy. What does that look like? What can you be doing right now? Well, you don't, journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. You don't do everything at once, but you have to have that thought in your mind. So if someone is interested in putting some of these things in place and seeing what that looks like for them, what's the best way that they can do that and reach out and connect with you?
All right. Well, the first way is you can always contact me on my business line, which is 980-866-8407, or you can reach me on my website, which is Insured by Nef.
Awesome. Well, Nef, thank you so much for coming back on. It was been a real pleasure chatting with you again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.